Hello all, my name is Olebeng, and this presentation focuses on children's acquisition of Setswana phonology, specifically the Setlhaping and Sekwena varieties of Setswana. This was a joint project and I'm presenting on behalf of my colleagues, Michelle Pascoe and Heather Brookes. Before I describe the details of our research study, I will give you some background information so as to highlight the rationale for undertaking this project. Setswana is one of South Africa's 12 officially recognized languages. It is a Southern Bantu language belonging to the Sotho language family. Setswana is spoken as a first language by about 4 million people in South Africa. This works to 8% of the country's population. Majority of Setswana speakers in South Africa live in the Northwest Province, a region that borders the country of Botswana. Setswana is a cross-border language and is spoken in Botswana, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, countries that are situated in the southern region of the African continent. These countries are circled in red on the map shown in this slide. There are several varieties of Setswana, and in South Africa, where our study was conducted, there are 8 varieties that have been documented, including Sekwena and Setlhaping, the 2 varieties of Setswana we investigated in our study. It is worth noting that Setswana is largely uniform amongst these varieties, and some of the variations are noted in pronunciation of some words only. Now, looking at the phonology of Setswana, like many Bantu languages, Setswana is an agglutinative language. This means that words can be formed by joining several morphemes. This also means that the meaning of root words can be changed using various noun class prefixes and suffixes. For instance, the root Tswana can take on different meanings depending on the noun class prefix. If we add prefix se, it becomes Setswana, the language. And if we add singular prefix mo, it becomes Motswana, which can be used to refer to a Setswana speaker or a citizen of Botswana. Setswana has 28 consonants and 7 vowels, none of which have diphthongal qualities. It has an open syllable structure, meaning that most syllables end in a vowel. The Setswana speech sound system does not have consonant clusters, except in producing loan words from West Germanic languages such as English and Afrikaans. For example, the word spielie, which is a mirror, is a word that has been borrowed from Afrikaans, speel. In addition, tone is semantically significant in Setswana, which means that a difference in tone serves to distinguish the meaning of phonetically identical words. The example given on this slide is mutlwa, which is produced with low tone all throughout, versus mutlwa, which means thorn. Now that I've given an overview of Setswana, I will get into some of the challenges that speech-language therapists face in South Africa. And these are some of the challenges that have inspired this project and that we tried to address. So, although Setswana is spoken by a fairly large population in Southern Africa, data on how it is acquired by typically developing children is limited. This is also true for other indigenous languages spoken in South Africa. This lack of normative data undoubtedly makes it challenging for speech-language therapists working in the South African context to accurately identify speech sound disorders in children acquiring Setswana and other indigenous languages. Despite these challenges, however, efforts have been made in an attempt to provide linguistically appropriate services. These efforts include translating available tools which have been developed for English-speaking children in countries such as the United States, the UK, and Australia. The reliability and validity of these translations, however, is questionable. This is especially true given the differences in structure between English and the languages these tools are translated into. Other efforts include research studies that have focused on describing speech development in some of South Africa's indigenous languages, with preliminary data now available for Setswana, isiXhosa, Sesotho, and isiZulu. I will now move on to describing the study aims and methods followed in achieving these aims. Before doing so, I would like to mention that this study is a continuation of one that was concluded in 2016, and that included only 36 typically developing children between the ages of 3 and 6 years, and that this previous study had a focus on segmental phonology. For this current study, we looked at the acquisition of both segmental and suprasegmental phonology in children between 2.5 years and 6 years and 5 months. The focus was on the following aspects of phonology, namely vowels, consonants, lexical tone, and the nature of phonological processes in children's speech. This was done for both varieties of Setswana that were studied, namely the Setlhaping and Sekwena varieties. This study made use of a cross-sectional design and included 81 children aged between 2 years and 5 months and 6 years and 5 months. Due to challenges in recruiting participants, we could not ensure an equal number of children for both varieties of Setswana studied. We therefore ended up with a total of 65 children acquiring the Sekwena variety and only 16 acquiring Setlhaping. There are currently no standardized tools available to measure speech sound development in children acquiring Setswana. A preliminary tool devised for the initial study that I mentioned on Setswana speech was revised and used in collecting data for the current study. It consisted of culturally appropriate hand-drawn illustrations, and an example of some of these illustrations is included in the slide that follows. The assessment only included a single word naming task. Production of all Setswana consonants could not be elicited because words consisting of them do not form part of young children's vocabulary. For instance, the round affricate twa in tware, which is an anaconda, could not be elicited or targeted in the speech assessment, as it does not form part of young children's vocabulary. So on this slide, I've just included 2 pictures of the illustrations that we've used in eliciting speech production from children, and I've bolded the phonemes that we were targeting. So for example, in the picture on the left, it was used to target the word kwena, and the phoneme that we were looking at specifically was round ejective vela kwa in kwena, and we also on the right we looked at ejective vela k in ikama, to comb one's hair. What we found from this study is that the 2-year-olds in this study had acquired all the Setswana vowels and they have them in their inventories. It is no surprise since many studies from various languages across the world have documented that children acquire vowels at an early age. Similar to findings from some Bantu languages, Setswana-speaking children had most consonants in their phonetic inventories by 2.5 years old. As is expected in typical development, the accuracy with which vowels and consonants are acquired increases with age in Setswana. Syllable structures were also noted to develop early, with only syllables that have rounding proving challenging for the 2- and 3-year-old children. Setswana-speaking children in this study had not yet acquired round alveolar trill rwa. For example, in the word rwala, which means to put one's shoes or hat, and they had not yet acquired this consonant by 6 years and 5 months. This suggests that this particular consonant phoneme is one of the few last acquired Setswana phonemes. While lexical tone was not measured instrumentally, the first author is a native Setswana speaker and could assess the accuracy with which tone was used in producing the words targeted in the assessment. It was found that children who were 2 years and 6 months were able to use lexical tone accurately at all times. In terms of the occurrence and nature of phonological processes, Setswana-speaking children aged 2 and 3 years presented with more phonological processes in comparison to those who are 4 years and older. It is worth noting that there were no differences in the developmental patterns between the two varieties of Setswana that were studied. Now, going back to phonological processes that were seen in Setswana-speaking children, the phonological processes included deletion of syllables in multisyllabic words, assimilation, and simplification of syllables with rounding, all of which disappeared by 6 years and 5 months. However, assimilation seemed to be the exception and was noted to not have disappeared in children who were aged 6 years and 5 months, indicating that it is one of the last phonological processes to disappear in children who are acquiring Setswana. It should, however, also be noted that assimilation in these children was only noted in production of one word. Before I conclude on the presentation, something that I missed in the previous slide is that the study also included a number of multilingual children as part of the study sample. And we noted that the speech development was comparable to those children who were acquiring Setswana only. Now, in conclusion, it is clear from this research data that the developmental trajectory of speech development in Setswana-speaking children is similar to those of other languages, in that the accuracy with which speech is produced increases with age, something that would be expected in typically developing children. Now, what is worth noting for this particular language is that most of the consonants in the Setswana phonetic inventory are developed as early as 2.5 years old. And these children use lexical tone accurately. There were obviously some limitations to the study, and more research is recommended, looking specifically in terms of making use of lexical tone in producing connected speech, something that should also be included when gathering data in future studies?